Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Redarc Tow Pro Liberty brake controller on a 2019 Nissan Armada. The Armada has a pretty heavy-duty towing capacity, and with that, and with heavier trailers, generally you're going to have trailer brakes associated with it, and it's just going to make your towing experience a lot better. You can control that swaying trailer if it's improperly loaded, or just coming to a stop. It's going to slow that trailer down and keep it from pushing the vehicle around. Your typical brake controller, you've probably seen them kind of living under here in the dash area, and you've probably smacked your knees on them before, as they do take up a decent amount of area. And a lot of them will have digital readouts and your manual slide, and it's all really nice, but you really don't need all of that. You can put it in a much smaller package, get that completely clean looking under here, and also just have a clean OEM look once the brake controller is installed. And that's the glory of the Redarc brake controller. Setting the brake controller, super easy. If you have a heavier trailer, you're gonna put this to a higher setting, obviously, and you can always start a little bit less. And the great part is when you are towing along and you have this set, you'll know that the brakes are being activated when you put the brakes on. You can see that turns from just a light pink there because I'm lightly applying the brakes, but as I really hold on the brakes there, it goes to a bright red. And now that I'm at a stop, it's kind of pulsing a little bit to that pink and red. Now, if I go heavier, like the 10 here, that's gonna be red. Now, you can manual override, and so it'll, again, illuminate at what number you're set for that manual override. And as I go to the higher settings, it turns red, and then it'll kind of cool the color down as I go back to 0. So you can have this to where it is a manual override, or it'll be proportional. And proportional just means as much as the vehicle's deaccelerating, it's gonna do the same on the trailer. So nice and easy. It's not your normal brake controller that's large and kind of in the way and you're trying to find that manual override slide. This one, just simple push of the button and it's gonna apply that brake. So really easy to use, and it's just tucked out of the way, nice and clean. Now, the installation of this brake controller is very easy. You could probably knock this out in, I'd say, about 30 minutes. As long as you find a nice open spot that you want to mount it up that's easily accessible, it's not too bad. And you are going to be drilling through to get that mounted up, but again, it is a real clean look once it's done, so you don't have to worry too much. It's going to be plug and play using that harness because it just simply ties into the vehicle's tow package underneath the dash. Plug that in, make the rest of the electrical connections by just plugging those in. Get everything zip tied up and you're ready to go. So I'm going to walk you through the installation, and that way you can get yours installed on your Armada. Now, to get our installation accomplished today, I'm actually picking up this adapter, and this is going to make this plug and play. There's going to be no splicing required. Now, if you're using the standard plug and don't pick this up, you are going to be cutting some wires back and splicing those into the factory brake controller harness. And it's not too terribly hard, but this makes it super easy. You just literally plug it in. You don't have to worry about any of your electrical connections becoming loose over time. So this is definitely something I recommend picking up just to make it a little bit easier. Now, as far as finding the plug, it's going to be located kind of right underneath the steering column. It's going to be pretty easy to find. It's just wrapped in electrical tape. But I'm going to be pulling this panel down because we're going to need to mount up our Redarc anyway. So instead of finding our plug right now, I'll pull this down and I'll show you it once we get there. And pulling this panel down is going to allow us to find a nice mounting point. The good part about the Redarc is obviously its small footprint, but also we need to make sure that the depth of it is going to be clear when we get this mounted up. So finding a good spot to mount it is kind of half the battle, but also making sure that the clearance where we want it mounted is also part of that equation. So to get this out, it's pretty easy. There's this panel here. I'll just pull that out, and that's going to gain us access to a Torx bit here. And this is going to be a T15, so we'll go ahead and get this taken out. And you're also going to have your hood latch release, which is right here. So to give us just a little bit more room to work with, it's pretty easy. There's actually two 10mm bolts that holds that up in there. So I'll get those loose, and then we can pull that out, separate it, and then get the rest of the panel out. once you get those 10mm bolts out, this should just kind of slide. It locks into the plastic a little bit, but kind of just slides out, and then this will drop down. You can see that tab there. And again, that's just going to kind of make it a little bit easier for us to have some room to move. So at this point, we can start getting this panel off, and I'm just going to kind of pull here, and there's going to be, it's kind of tucked into the weather stripping here by the door panel. But as we kind of pull, just know that there is electrical obviously still connected, so you don't want to yank too hard on here, and really just kind of work your way from the bottom up, and that's going to allow this to kind of drop. So pretty easy here. That way we can kind of see where we want to mount it. And on this one, I think I'm going to mount it right about this area. There is a metal panel, a bracket here, so it looks like we have a nice little hole that we can put right about here. But while we have this down, I'm going to show you where that plug is so we can gain access to that and start getting things plugged up. Now, underneath the steering column here, you can see where the actual steering shaft is. In between this and this white box, you're going to find this thick wire loom here, and just kind of reach up, and there should be electrical tape wrapped around a plug. Looks like this here, and that is where we're going to plug in our harness. So you can see our plug looks just like the male end of what we're going to be plugging in. So I'll grab my harness and we'll get that plugged in. So I'm just going to take our clip here, and this will just slide on one way. Should hear a nice click there. So we're officially tied into our factory brake controller output. So then we'll come over to this portion of that wire harness here, and it's just going to plug in directly to our Redarc control box, and that snaps in like that. Our next connection, we're going to kind of wait to plug this in because this is going to go into the brake controller. And you have one side that's at a 90, which is really nice for tight spots, and then you have a straight one here. Now it can go in either way to the module, but really what I'm going to do is get this mounted up first, and then I can determine which the bend works better than the flat, vice versa. So what I'm going to do is mark my spot where I'm going to mount it, which is going to be right about here, but making sure I have that clearance for this to sit in. You know, if you go too far, you might hit this metal bracket. So getting this properly aligned at a good height. Once we do have where we want to mount it, I'm going to go ahead and just make a little mark with my paint marker before drilling it out. So just kind of mocking this up, making sure that we have clearance and double checking. I'm going to go kind of right about here. And that way, because it's going to be kind of at an angle as it contours to this, I want to make sure that it's going to be clear while sitting in place. So I'll go ahead, make my mark, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab my drill bit. So I've gone ahead and made my mark with a paint marker. I'm going to just take a small drill bit and just make a pilot hole here for us. And then we're going to be coming back with a 3/8 drill bit, and that's going to be just large enough for our brake controller to kind of pass through, and then also be able to attach the nut to it. So I'll go ahead and get that drilled out. And then once you drill that out, go ahead and make sure there's no flashing around it. You just want to make sure that it's going to sit nice and flush. Sometimes these do have a little bit of trouble when you put the retaining collar lock nut on here, that it doesn't want to pass all the way through. But ours is looking pretty good, so I'm just going to take a file and just kind of knock some of these edges out. So I'm pretty happy here with where I have it mounted. Or where it's going to mount up, but you'll see there is a small LED light, and that's going to light up our dial when we have it in place. So we are going to need to drill a hole, and what you can kind of do is put this center, line up that knob, and you'll see the height that you need to drill for the hole. It's pretty much right above it, and that way that can poke through there. So using a 1/8 of an inch drill bit, that's going to allow us to get that hole mounted up. So just directly above it at the 12 o'clock position, you go ahead and make that hole. So what we're going to do here is take our brake controller, we'll slide this in, kind of get this lined up, and then there's going to be this little trim piece here, and this is just going to create a marker to be our position of where the brake controller is actually reading as far as gain. So just kind of make sure that that's in place, and then we'll take this retaining nut, and this is just going to thread on there. So kind of just tighten this down by hand, And you might need to enlarge the hole just a bit just to kind of get this to fit. It's pretty tight here. So I am going to go ahead with my drill bit and just kind of waller it out just a little bit more to where this will pass through. So just kind of hold that that plastic trim piece in place. It does have a little kind of just plastic ring that you should be able to slide in that hole you drilled. And if you need to tighten this down, it's going to be just a 12mm socket. Just do this by hand. This plastic trim ring can actually crack and bend pretty easily, so don't put too much pressure. You just want it snug. You really don't have to crank it down too hard for it to get in place. Now when you tighten it down, you're going to want to make sure that you can still actuate the button, and sometimes when you tighten it, it doesn't want to push. It'll feel like it's stuck, so make sure you can actually click this. And then what you'll do is turn this counterclockwise all the way, and then take your button, find the 0, and line that up with that little trim piece here, and that way that's going to be your 0 point, and you'll be able to adjust accordingly with that light being up top so you can see the number. Now at this point, what we're going to do is go ahead and we'll grab our Ethernet cord here, and this is going to be our connection between the brake controller and the module. So now I'm going to go ahead and take our 90-degree one here, and that's going to keep this nice and tight. We'll go ahead, plug that in. And then the other portion, what we're going to want to do is, this is a good time to get everything mounted up. Now as far as mounting our module up, you want to make sure it's not on wire loom. But other than that, pretty much anywhere secure. So even this bracket here, we can run some zip ties, and that way it's going to stay in place. Some of that wire loom can move as the car moves, and this uses a kind of a G-force or moving around to determine when to apply the brakes. So you're going to want to, again, just find a nice solid point and get this zip tied up, plug that in, and we should see this light up. So in fact, we'll give it a little test run here just to make sure we have everything properly there. Blue light comes on, so that's a good sign. So we'll go ahead, get this mounted up, and then I'll show you how it looks. So I ended up having to make a small notch here, and this plastic, I found there's nothing behind it, so I just trimmed that out to allow our brake controller to sit in here. So something to check before you pop this panel back on, just make sure you have clearance. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of room here without doing a little bit of trimming. So just a little notch here allowed me to get this to fit. And then from there, I just grabbed our plug-in harness as well as our Ethernet here and just zip tied it along. So I have both my wires running over here, and then my module is going to be tucked back here. So I just went ahead and plugged in both of the connections on the module, and I zip tied this up so it's nice and secure. I also made sure that I have clearance for my steering wheel controls to move in and out. That way it's not going to make contact with anything. So just make sure that, again, it's not just loose hanging down, you're going to catch on the steering column or anything like that. So just double check that the blue light on the controller is still kicking on. That way all your connections are secure, and then we can go ahead and get our panel put back in place. Now this does need to be calibrated, and that's because when you mount your module up, it kind of needs to figure out where it sits and also motion, so that way it knows when to actually activate the brakes. And so if you're getting a blue and green flash, that means that it's calibrating. Now you don't have to do this with your trailer attached, it'll do it normally as well. Just kind of doing normal braking should calibrate it, but if you are planning on hooking up directly to your trailer and hitting the road, just make sure that you have a solid blue light there, and that way you know that you're good to go. So we can see that our Redarc here is blinking, it's alternating blue and green, and that means it's searching for calibration, and really all you have to do is just normal braking here and there. And you may have to do a couple brake stops, but after just a few times of getting up to speed and hitting the brakes, it should become a solid blue, and that's going to tell us that it's calibrated. So just with that last stop, that's solid blue, we're good to go. And that was a look and installation of the Redarc Tow Pro Liberty on a 2019 Nissan Armada.